I stood behind the velvet curtain at the Pacific Heights Club, my champagne glass trembling from sheer disgust. My fiancé, Derek, was loudly bragging that I was just a beautiful parasite trying to steal his fortune. He had no idea the black credit card he was waving was paid for by the dividends of a conglomerate I secretly owned. The real gold digger in this relationship was about to learn a lesson worth billions about who truly owned the game. My name is Serafina Cross, and at 29 years old, I had learned that silence was often the most expensive commodity in any room. From my vantage point, I watched the man I was supposed to marry in 2 months holding court with a group of venture capitalists. The air smelled of expensive cigars and even more expensive lies. "You have to understand, guys," Derek said, swirling his whiskey as he leaned in toward his friends. "I love Serafina, really, but she's a financial liability. I had to structure a prenup just to keep my assets safe from her. She thinks she's hit the jackpot with a Zenith Global director." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the venue's air conditioning. Derek Hawthorne, the man who had held me while I cried over my father's death, was currently dissecting my character for sport. "She's a freelance graphic designer," he continued, laughing as his friend patted him on the back. "Makes peanuts. She's lucky if she pulls in $30,000 a year. I'm basically a charity worker at this point." One of the men pointed at the ring on my finger, visible in the distance if I had been out there. That rock looked real enough last time I saw it. Derek lowered his voice, a conspiratorial smirk playing on his lips. "High-end cubic zirconia. My friend. It keeps her vanity satisfied." I told her it cost 50 grand, but why waste capital on a depreciating asset when I can put that money into the new tech fund? Women like her don't know the difference. Women like me. I did not cry. Tears were for people who had lost something, and I realized in that moment that I had lost absolutely nothing of value. I looked down at my left wrist. Hidden beneath the modest sleeve of my off-the-rack polyester blouse was a limited edition Patek Philippe watch. It was one of only 5 in the world, a 21st birthday gift from my late father. That single timepiece was worth more than Derek's entire cumulative salary for the next 10 years. The irony was almost suffocating. Derek was a director at Zenith Global. He was a mid-level executive with a puffed-up chest. I was Serafina Cross, sole heiress to the Cross family fortune and the secret majority shareholder of the holding company that owned Zenith Global. I was his boss's boss's boss. For 3 years, I had curated this persona. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my billions. I wore thrift store clothes. I lived in a rented apartment in a transitional neighborhood. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. I had tested him, over and over, and he had seemed to pass every single one. He had been kind. He had been patient. Or so I thought. Now I saw the truth. He was not just arrogant. He was creating a narrative where he was the victim of a grasping woman so he could hide his own financial incompetence. The rage that filled me was not hot or explosive. It was ice cold. It was the calculated fury of a CEO realizing an employee had been embezzling company resources. I could have walked out there. I could have rolled up my sleeve, flashed the watch, and fired him on the spot in front of San Francisco's elite. But that would be too easy. That would be mercy. I smoothed down my skirt. I practiced the expression I had perfected over the last 1,000 days, the look of a woman who was just happy to be invited. I widened my eyes, softened my jaw, and stepped out from behind the velvet curtain. "Derek," I called out, my voice trembling slightly, feigning nervousness. I got lost looking for the restroom. This place is so big." Derek flinched. The arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by the slick, practiced charm of a predator. He set his drink down and rushed over to me. "Babe," he cooed, wrapping an arm around my waist and squeezing a little too hard. "I was just telling the guys how proud I am of your little art projects." I looked up at him, beaming with the adoration of a fool. "You're so good to me, Derek." I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd be lost, sweetheart," he whispered in my ear, a statement he meant as a threat but disguised as affection. "But don't worry. I've got you. I know," I said, resting my head on his chest. My hand moved to the pearl brooch pinned to my cheap collar. With a subtle press of my finger, I felt the tiny vibration confirming activation. The micro recorder was rolling. The game had officially changed. He thought he was trapping a mouse. But he had just walked into the lion's den. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of a nondescript office building in the Mission District. To the outside world, this was a failing accounting firm that had not seen a client in years. In reality, it was the nerve center of my private intelligence network. Marcus, the Cross family's most trusted fixer and legal shark, sat behind a wall of monitors. He did not ask why I was there so early. He simply unlocked the encrypted server. "I need a full forensic audit," I said, my voice steady. "Derek Hawthorne. Personal accounts, credit lines, and every single project he manages at Zenith Global. Leave no stone unturned." Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans. I watched the data streams compile, stripping away the layers of Derek's life until only the raw, ugly numbers remained. "It is worse than you suspected." "Serafina," Marcus said after 40 minutes, spinning his chair around to face me. "He is not just living beyond his means. He is drowning." I leaned in, studying the red lines on the screen. "Give me the number." $7 million, Marcus replied. "He is leveraged to the hilt. High-risk cryptocurrency schemes that collapsed 6 months ago and a severe online gambling addiction. He owes nearly $2 million to unregulated private lenders, the kind that break legs when you miss a payment." The picture was coming into focus. The rush to get married, the pressure, the anxiety I had mistaken for wedding jitters. It was not love. It was panic. And the prenup I asked. Marcus pulled up the draft document Derek had left on his cloud drive. "It is a masterpiece of deception. He has structured it so that any inheritance you receive within the first year of marriage automatically becomes marital property to cover joint liabilities. He is targeting the trust fund you told him your grandmother left you." "The imaginary trust fund," I corrected him. "He is trying to steal money that does not even exist to pay off debts he never told me about." "There is more," Marcus said, his tone darkening. "I tracked the spending on the supplementary credit card you gave him. You authorized it for household expenses and groceries." "Correct, yes." "He has been siphoning $3,000 a month to a shell merchant account labeled Lux Events." "What is Lux Events?" Marcus tapped a key, and a lease agreement appeared on the main screen. "It is a front for a luxury apartment rental in Soma. The lease is under the name Isabella Vance." My stomach turned. Isabella, his college best friend. The woman who had cried tears of joy when we got engaged. The woman who was supposed to be my maid of honor. "Show me," I commanded. Marcus hesitated for a split second before opening a video file. The footage was from the security feed of the Soma apartment building entrance. It was dated 2 days ago. Derek and Isabella walked into the frame, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. They looked comfortable, intimate, and conspiratorial. Then Marcus switched to the audio feed he had intercepted from Derek's phone. She actually wore that polyester dress to the gala. Isabella's voice sneered through the speakers. I almost laughed in her face. "She has absolutely no taste." "How do you stand it?" "Derek, I just close my eyes and think of the payout," Derek's voice replied, followed by the sound of a cork popping. "Once the papers are signed, we take her little inheritance. Pay off the sharks, and I can finally dump the dead weight." "She is just a stupid golden goose. Izzy, that's all she is." I watched the screen, my face reflected in the glass over their treacherous images. They were laughing at my clothes. My clothes were bespoke, hand-stitched by Italian masters who did not believe in labels. but Isabella was too obsessed with logos to recognize true quality. They called me stupid. They called me a goose. I stood up, the last remnants of affection for Derek incinerating instantly. I did not feel heartbreak. I felt the clarity of a judge passing a death sentence. Save everything. I told Marcus, every transaction, every video clip, every text message. I want it all cataloged. What is the play? Serafina Marcus asked, his hand hovering over a document titled Project Dissolution. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I opened the secure executive portal for Zenith Global and navigated to the personnel file for Derek Hawthorne. "We are not just canceling the wedding," I said, my voice devoid of mercy. "We are going to burn his world down. He wants a show, I will give him a show." I looked at Marcus. "Initiate Operation Purge," I ordered. "I want him to lose his job, his reputation, his friends, and his freedom. And I want Isabella to go down with him." Marcus nodded and printed a single sheet of paper. It was the authorization form for a covert internal investigation. I picked up the pen and signed my name, not as the loving fiancé, but as Serafina Cross, the woman who owned the ground they walked on. The hunt was on. The maitre d' seated us at the most secluded table in the five-star restaurant, the kind of place where the water menu had more pages than a novel. Derek slid a thick document across the white tablecloth, his expression the picture of concern. "It is standard procedure." "Babe," Derek said, covering my hand with his. "I run high-risk investments. If a deal goes south, creditors could come after our marital assets. This prenup, it protects you from my debts. I am doing this because I love you." I picked up the pen, letting my hand tremble visibly. I looked at the legal jargon, feigning total confusion. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a familiar figure 2 tables away. Isabella was sitting alone, facing us, sipping a martini and watching the performance like a director on set. I don't know, Derek," I stammered, widening my eyes to look as helpless as possible. "It says here that I waive all rights to future earnings. Is that normal?" Derek let out a soft, patronizing chuckle. "It is just legal boilerplate. Serafina, don't worry your pretty little head about it. Just trust me." I saw Isabella smirk behind her glass. They thought I was the lamb being led to slaughter. It was time to introduce the wolf. "Okay," I whispered. "If you say so." I signed the papers with a shaky hand. Then, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a worn leather folder. I placed it on the table, then stood up abruptly. "I need to use the ladies' room," I said. "I will be right back." "Oh, please don't look at that folder. It is just some boring paperwork from a distant relative." I walked away, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reached the hallway, I knew Derek was already opening the folder. Inside was a fabricated letter from the executor of the estate of a non-existent uncle, claiming I was the sole beneficiary of a rare earth mine in Nevada valued at $50 million. When I returned 5 minutes later, Derek's entire demeanor had shifted. His pupils were dilated, and he was sweating. He had clearly texted Isabella. The plan had changed. They did not just want to dump me anymore. They wanted to marry me, secure the $50 million, and then discard me. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Better than okay," Derek said, his voice cracking slightly. "So, about this paperwork, is there anything you need to tell me?" "Oh, that," I sighed. "It is actually a headache. The lawyer said my uncle was very traditional. To release the inheritance, my future husband has to prove his financial stability. He has to contribute $1 million to a joint trust fund before the wedding day. It is silly, really. I probably just won't claim the money." Derek nearly choked on his steak. "Not claim. $50 million, Serafina. That is insane. We can figure this out, but you don't have $1 million lying around." "Derek," I said innocently, "and I would never ask you to stress yourself." I have it, he blurted out. I, I have savings, investments. I can liquidate them immediately. For us. For our future. The trap snapped shut. The next morning, from my secure terminal, I watched the digital trail of Derek's desperation. He did not have $1 million. He barely had 5,000. Driven by greed and the promise of my massive inheritance, he made the fatal mistake I had been waiting for. He accessed the Zenith Global internal accounts, using his director clearance. He began manipulating the budget for Project Phoenix, a renewable energy initiative. He created false invoices for non-existent consulting firms and routed the funds. It was a clumsy, frantic embezzlement. Under normal circumstances, the compliance algorithm would have flagged it instantly, but I was the system. I was the chairman. I watched the request for $1 million flash on my screen, awaiting final approval from the Oversight Committee. I clicked Approve. However, I did not send the money to his personal account. I routed the transfer through a shadow loop that deposited the funds into a frozen escrow account that only the legal department could access. To Derek, it looked like the money had cleared. To the law, it looked like undeniable evidence of grand larceny. That evening, Derek came to my apartment. He handed me a bank draft for $1 million with a shaking hand. He looked exhausted but triumphant. There, he said, pulling me into a hug that made my skin crawl. $1 million, just like the lawyer asked. Now we can access your inheritance together. I took the check, looking at him with dewy eyes. Oh, Derek, you saved everything. You really are the most capable man I know. I would do anything for you, he whispered. I know, I replied softly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Marcus Evidence secured. The file is complete. He is ours. Derek smiled at me, thinking he had just bought a ticket to a life of luxury. He had no idea he had just purchased a one-way ticket to federal prison. Derek, darling, meet your savior, he announced, gesturing to Isabella, who stood in my living room holding a binder. She was feigning professional distance, but I could see the greed in her eyes. Isabella used to plan events for the city. She offered to step in and handle everything for the wedding so you don't stress. Oh, Isabella, thank you, I exclaimed, clasping my hands together. I want everything to be perfect. I want the flowers to be overwhelming, and the wine must be vintage, only the best for us, right? Derek. Derek's smile was tight. He was signing contracts left and right, putting his name on invoices that totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. Isabella was booking the most expensive vendors in California, doubling the market rates and skimming the difference as a kickback. What neither of them knew was that the floral company, the catering service, and even the venue management firm were all subsidiaries of Zenith Global's hospitality division. Derek was going into massive debt to pay me, and Isabella was stealing money that would eventually route back to my own ledger. 2 days later, during my dress fitting at the Vera Wang Atelier, I set the next bait. Isabella was zipping me into a gown that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. It is beautiful, I whispered, staring at my reflection with wide, watery eyes. My grandmother's mine deed is in the safe at my old apartment. I need to get it before the wedding, but I always forget the code. Isabella paused, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. You should write it down, sweetie. It is silly, I giggled. It is just 0404. My birthday. I am so bad with numbers. I saw the spark in her eyes. The trap was set. That afternoon, I sat in the surveillance van parked down the street from my own apartment, watching the live feed on a monitor. Derek and Isabella had wasted no time. They were tearing my living room apart. Where is the safe? Derek hissed, throwing cushions onto the floor. She said it was in the bedroom. Stop whining and look, Isabella snapped. God, she is such a slob. Look at these cheap throw pillows. On the screen, I watched them locate the wall safe. Derek punched in the code I had fed them. Inside. There was no deed, but there was a leather-bound journal. Isabella snatched it up. "Listen to this." She laughed, reading aloud. "I know Derek has been distant lately. Sometimes I feel like he doesn't respect me. But maybe it is my fault. I am just not smart enough for him. I don't deserve anyone better." Derek grabbed the book, reading the entry I had written just that morning. A look of pure, unadulterated arrogance washed over his face. He tossed the journal onto the bed. "She knows nothing," he declared, puffing out his chest. "She thinks she is the problem. I have her completely wrapped around my finger. She is just a slow milk cow waiting to be milked. A cow with a $50 million udder," Isabella added, high-fiving him. Hearing them dehumanize me should have hurt. Instead, it fueled me. They believed the narrative of my weakness so completely that they had stopped looking for my strength. Derek pulled out his phone and dialed a number. I switched the audio feed to listen. "Tony, it is Derek," he said, his voice booming with false confidence. "Yeah, I know I missed the payment. Listen to me. The wedding is in 48 hours, Monday morning. I will have the full $7 million for you, plus 20% interest for the delay. Just back off for 2 days. He hung up, grinning at Isabella. "We are going to be rich, Izzy. Filthy rich." I turned off the monitor. He had just confirmed his intent to defraud his future wife to pay off illegal debts. I picked up my encrypted phone. It was time for the final maneuver. I typed out a message to the board of directors of Zenith Global. Emergency meeting of shareholders. Agenda: immediate restructuring of executive leadership and internal fraud investigation. Location: Malibu Estate. Time immediately following the Hawthorne wedding reception, I hit send. The invite went to everyone except Derek. The stage was set for the greatest performance of his life, and he did not even know the curtain was about to fall on his neck. The final fitting was supposed to be a romantic occasion, but Derek had turned it into a spectacle of his own narcissism. We were at the most exclusive jeweler in Union Square to pick out the wedding bands. Derek pointed a manicured finger at a platinum band encrusted with diamonds that was far too gaudy for a man of his standing, but perfect for a man trying to project wealth he did not possess. "We will take it," Derek announced loudly, making sure the other customers heard him. He pulled out his wallet and produced a platinum credit card. I recognized it immediately. It was a Zenith Global corporate expense card, strictly reserved for travel and client entertainment. He was attempting to expense his own wedding ring to the company he worked for. The sales associate swiped the card. A sharp, negative beep cut through the classical music playing in the store. She tried again. Another beep. "I am sorry, sir," the associate said, her voice dripping with professional pity. "The transaction has been declined. The limit has been exceeded." Derek turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his tie. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. I had personally lowered the spending limit on that specific card to $500 just an hour ago via my admin portal. "That is impossible," Derek sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It must be a system error. The bank's fraud detection is too sensitive." "It is okay, honey," I said sweetly, stepping forward. I reached into my purse and withdrew a heavy, matte black titanium card. It had no numbers on the front, just a small, inlaid chip and my signature. It was the Centurion card, invitation only, with no spending limit. "Let me get this," I said, placing the heavy metal card on the glass counter with a distinctive clink. "You can just pay me back later." "Okay." The sales associate's eyes widened as she looked at the card. Then at me, and finally at Derek with a look of profound judgment. A man who buys a ring on a company card is tacky, but a man who lets his fiancé bail him out with a black card is pathetic. Derek and Isabella, who was hovering near the necklaces, stared at the card as if it were an alien artifact. "My uncle gave it to me for emergencies." I lied effortlessly. "He is very generous." Right. Derek exhaled, regaining his composure. Your uncle, of course. We should really thank him. We will. I promised. After we left the store, I suggested we go to my office to finalize the honeymoon plans. I want you to see where I work. I said, it is not much. I just rent a small corner in the basement of the Cross Tower to do my freelance designs. Cross Tower, Isabella asked, raising an eyebrow. That is prime real estate. I got a good deal on a storage room they converted, I explained. When we walked into the lobby of the Cross Tower, the air shifted. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, the headquarters of my family's empire. As we approached the elevators, a senior vice president was walking out. He saw me, stopped dead in his tracks, and bowed his head deeply. Good afternoon, he said with terrified reverence. Afternoon, I replied casually. Derek straightened his jacket, puffing out his chest. Did you see that he whispered to Isabella as the elevator doors closed? They know who I am. Zenith Global is a big player here. Even the tenants respect me. I suppressed a laugh. We rode the elevator down to the basement level, not the penthouse where my actual office occupied the entire top floor. I led them down a concrete hallway to a room that was essentially a glorified janitor's lounge. I had arranged for a desk to be shoved in there next to a stack of industrial floor wax. This is it, I said, gesturing to the cramped space. Derek looked around with sneering disdain. Well, it is cozy, but you won't need to work in a dump like this once we are married. He sat on the edge of the desk, checking his watch. Speaking of which, Serafina, I checked the joint account. The $1 million I gave you, it hasn't shown up yet. I froze, playing the part of the scatterbrained artist. Oh, I completely forgot. I have the check right here in my bag. I was going to deposit it tomorrow. Derek's face contorted with pure panic. Tomorrow, Serafina. The wedding is in 2 days. We need that money to show proof of funds for the lawyer. Or the deal for the mine is off. Isabella stepped forward, her voice sharp. You need to do it now. Serafina, mobile deposit. Do it right now. Why are you shouting? I asked, my voice trembling. I didn't know it was such a rush. Just give me the phone, Derek snapped, snatching my phone from my hand. He opened the banking app. Do it. Transfer the check to the joint account. Now. He held the phone out to me, his hand shaking. He was desperate. He needed that money to appear in the account so he could wire it out to his loan sharks immediately. He didn't know I had set up a sandbox environment on my phone, a fake banking interface that looked real but processed nothing. I tapped the screen, initiating the fake deposit. A green checkmark appeared. Transaction successful. Funds available immediately. There, I said. It is done. Derek let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. He looked at Isabella and nodded. He thought he had secured his lifeline. He thought he had won. Good girl, he said, patting my cheek with a condescending smirk. You see, business requires speed. Serafina, you will learn. I smiled back at him. I am learning so much from you. Derek, you have no idea. 2 days before the wedding, Derek decided to throw a bachelor party that was less about celebrating his final days of freedom and more about broadcasting his perceived success. He rented a super yacht docked at the marina, inviting every major partner from Zenith Global and the cream of San Francisco society. He insisted I attend, not as his equal, but as a trophy prop to drag around and introduce as the luckiest woman in the world. I decided to play the part, but with a twist. I arrived an hour late. When I stepped onto the deck, the hum of conversation died instantly. I was not wearing the department store clearance dress Derek expected. I was draped in a silk silver gown that clung to my frame like liquid moonlight. But it was not the dress that silenced the crowd. It was the necklace resting against my collarbone. It was the Royal Sapphire set, a family heirloom comprised of deep, velvety blue stones surrounded by flawless diamonds. The set was valued at over $3 million. Derek's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. He hurried over, his smile tight and panicked. "You look incredible," he hissed through his teeth as he gripped my arm. "But where did you get that jewelry? Please tell me it is costume stuff." "It is borrowed," I said, my voice carrying a melodic lightness. "Something blue," right before he could grill me further. Isabella materialized. She was wearing a red dress that looked cheap next to my silk, and her eyes were burning with jealousy. She held a large glass of red wine, her knuckles white against the stem. "Serafina," she cooed, stepping too close. "You look so expensive. Did you rent that something like that?" I replied. "Oops." With a theatrical stumble, Isabella lurched forward. The contents of her glass splashed across the front of my silver gown, a dark, blood-like stain spreading rapidly across the silk. The music stopped. The guests gasped. Derek looked mortified, not for me, but for the scene being caused. "Oh my God," Isabella said, covering her mouth with a hand that was not trembling at all. "I am so sorry. I am just so clumsy." I did not scream. I did not run to the bathroom to cry. I looked down at the stain, then back at Isabella with a calm that unsettled her. "It is fine," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. It was getting a little warm anyway. I reached down to the thigh-high slit of the dress, grabbed the fabric near the stain, and with a sharp, violent motion, I ripped the silk. The sound of tearing fabric echoed across the deck. I tore the stained panel away completely, knotting the remaining fabric at my hip. In 10 seconds, I had transformed the ruined gown into a daring, avant-garde cocktail dress that looked even more intentional and high fashion than before. The crowd erupted in applause. Isabella stood frozen, holding her empty glass, looking like a foolish child. I walked past her, head high. As I moved through the crowd, an older man with gray hair stepped into my path. It was Arthur Sterling, a senior managing partner at Zenith Global and one of the few people who knew my father personally. His eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Cross," he started to say, bowing his head. "I didn't know you were—" I pressed a finger to my lips. Smiling softly. "Enjoy the party, Arthur. Tonight is about surprises." He understood immediately and stepped back, blending into the crowd. Derek, however, was furious. He dragged me into the shadows of the upper deck, away from the guests. "Are you insane?" he snapped, his face red. "That jewelry, if you lose it, we are ruined. The insurance alone must cost thousands. You are spending money we don't have yet." I looked at him, touching the cold stones at my neck. "Derek, look at me. Do you really feel like you know the value of what you are holding?" He blinked, missing the point entirely. "I know that you are a liability until that inheritance comes through. Go sit down and don't touch anything else." He stormed off, heading back to his group of sycophants. I adjusted the pearl brooch on my dress, the second listening device I had planted. I pulled out my phone and tuned into the audio feed. Derek was laughing with his friends, clinking glasses. "She is high maintenance." "Man," one of his friends joked. "Not for long." Derek's voice came through clear as day. "Enjoy the show while it lasts. Boys, once the ink is dry on the marriage certificate and the funds are transferred, she is going to have a little mental breakdown. I have a doctor lined up to testify she is unstable. I will get power of attorney, dump her in a nice facility upstate, and the money is mine. She won't know what hit her." I stopped the recording. That was it. Conspiracy to commit fraud and false imprisonment. He had just handed me the keys to his coffin. I looked out at the dark ocean, the wind whipping my shortened dress. I opened a secure messaging app and typed a single line to Marcus. "Start Operation Phoenix at 0 hour. The party was just getting started, but for Derek Hawthorne, the end had already begun. The Malibu estate was a sprawling masterpiece of white marble and glass perched precariously on the edge of the Pacific cliffs. To Derek, this was the most expensive rental property on the West Coast, a venue I had allegedly begged the owner to let us use for a fraction of the price. In reality, I had signed the deed to this house 5 years ago. It was my summer retreat, and today, it was the stage for an execution. The guest list was a volatile cocktail of high society and the criminal underworld. On the left side of the aisle sat the entire board of directors of Zenith Global, men and women in Italian suits who controlled the flow of billions of dollars. On the right side, scattered among innocent friends, were men with hardened faces and ill-fitting tuxedos. These were Derek's shadow creditors, the loan sharks he owed $7 million to. I had sent them anonymous invitations, promising that their debtor would be flush with cash by the end of the ceremony. Derek stood at the altar, looking every inch the conquering hero. He adjusted his silk tie, scanning the crowd with a smug satisfaction that made my stomach turn. He caught my eye as I walked down the aisle and winked. He was not looking at his bride. He was looking at his retirement plan. Isabella stood directly behind me as my maid of honor. As the music swelled and the guests stood, she leaned forward, her breath hot against my ear. "Make sure you smile, sweetie," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You look stiff. Don't worry. Once this is over, Derek and I will take good care of your money while you rest in that special hospital we found for you." I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on the horizon where the storm clouds were gathering over the ocean. I reached the altar and took my place beside Derek. He reached for my hand, his palm sweaty and clammy. The priest, a man Derek had hired specifically because he kept ceremonies short, cleared his throat. He went through the motions, speaking of love, trust, and fidelity. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, the moment arrived. The priest looked out at the sea of faces. "If there is anyone present who sees just cause why this man and this woman may not be lawfully joined together," the priest intoned, his voice echoing off the cliffs, "speak now, or forever hold your peace." A heavy silence descended on the lawn. All that could be heard was the crashing of waves below and the rustling of the floral arrangements in the wind. Derek smirked, shifting his weight, ready for the priest to continue. I smiled. It was the sharp, dangerous smile of a predator dropping its camouflage. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand, the feedback screeching slightly. "I object," I said calmly. The silence shattered. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Derek froze, his smile faltering into a look of confusion. He chuckled nervously, glancing at the guests. She is just joking," Derek stammered, waving his hand dismissively. "Serafina has a weird sense of humor. Everyone, babe, put the mic down." I did not put the mic down. I stepped away from the altar, turning my back on him. I walked slowly toward the massive LED screen that had been set up behind the stage to display our engagement photos. "I am not joking, Derek," I said, my voice amplified and steady. "In fact, I have never been more serious in my life." I pulled a small remote from the pocket of my wedding dress and pressed the center button. The image of us kissing on the beach vanished. The screen flickered black for a second before exploding into brilliant white light. 2 massive logos appeared, looming over the terrified groom. The first was the Zenith Global insignia. The second, larger and more imposing, was the crest of the Cross Corporation. The board members in the audience stood up, murmuring frantically. They recognized the crest immediately. It was the symbol of the parent company that signed their paychecks. I turned to face the crowd, smoothing down the front of my white gown. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," I announced, my voice commanding the attention of every soul on the cliff. "The wedding is canceled. Instead, welcome to the extraordinary emergency shareholder meeting of Zenith Global." I looked Derek dead in the eyes. watching the blood drain from his face until he was ghost white. "My name is not just Serafina," I declared, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "I am Serafina Cross. I own the Cross Corporation. I own Zenith Global. And most unfortunately for you, Derek. I am your boss." Derek threw his head back and let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark of hysteria. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face twisting into a mask of faux pity. "She is having an episode," Derek shouted, turning to the guests with wide, manic eyes. "I told you all. She is mentally unstable. She thinks she owns Zenith Global Security. Get this delusional woman off the stage immediately." The 4 burly security guards stationed at the corners of the venue began to move. They marched up the aisle with heavy, synchronized steps. Derek smirked, straightening his jacket, believing his command was law. "Take her away," he sneered. The lead guard walked past me without a glance. He grabbed Derek by the shoulder and forced him to his knees with a bone-crushing grip. 2 other guards seized Isabella, who shrieked as they twisted her arms behind her back. "What are you doing?" Derek screamed, his voice cracking. "I am the groom. I am a director. Unhand me." "You are a thief," I said coldly. I pressed the button on the remote again. The massive LED screen behind me shifted. The first video began to play. It was the footage from the club, crystal clear and amplified by the concert-grade speakers. She's a financial liability, high-end cubic zirconia. Women like her don't know the difference. The guests gasped. Derek's face turned the color of ash. I did not give him time to recover. I skipped to the second video, the one recorded on the yacht just 2 days ago. "Once the ink is dry, dump her in a nice facility upstate. She won't know what hit her." A woman in the front row sobbed. It was Derek's mother. She buried her face in her hands, unable to look at the monster she had raised. His father stared at the screen, his jaw hanging slack in total disbelief. "That is deep fake," Derek yelled, struggling against the guard's hold. "It is AI. She faked it all." "Let us talk about something real then," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his panic. "Let us talk about the numbers." I clicked the remote. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen, highlighting a series of red transactions. "You embezzled $1 million from Project Phoenix," I announced, pointing at the figures. "You thought you were stealing from a faceless corporation. You were stealing from me, and that is not all. You currently owe $7 million in gambling debts and bad cryptocurrency positions." I pointed to the group of grim-faced men sitting on the right side of the aisle. They were not smiling. "There is no rare earth mine." "Derek," I continued, walking slowly toward him until I was looming over his kneeling form. "There is no rich uncle. The only wealth you were trying to steal belongs to the very company you work for. You tried to rob the hand that feeds you." Isabella saw her chance. While everyone was focused on Derek, she kicked off her heels and tried to bolt toward the side exit. She did not make it 10 feet. One of the men from the creditor group stood up and blocked her path. He was massive, wearing a tuxedo that strained against his shoulders. "Going somewhere?" Isabella the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Your name is on the guarantor documents for the Lux Events Shell Company. You don't leave until we get our money." Isabella collapsed onto the grass, weeping loudly. Derek looked around, realizing there was no escape. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, sniveling desperation. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "Serafina, please," he begged, his voice trembling. I did it for us. I wanted to be a man worthy of you. I love you. You have to believe me. Everything I did was because I love you so much." "You love me?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yes." More than anything, I pulled out my phone and held it up to the microphone. I played the final audio file, recorded just the night before in my apartment. "She is just a..." A slow milk cow waiting to be milked. A cow with a $50 million udder. Derek's voice rang out across the silent garden, crude and hateful. The lie of his love died instantly in the salt air. He slumped forward, his forehead touching the grass, defeated by his own words. At that moment, the heavy wooden doors of the estate burst open. A dozen officers from the Economic Crimes Unit marched onto the lawn, their badges glinting in the afternoon sun. Derek Hawthorne, the lead officer barked, holding up a warrant. You are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to commit extortion. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the only music I needed. The lead detective did not lower his voice. He held the warrant up like a shield, his tone cutting through the salt air with practiced indifference. Derek Hawthorne, the officer announced. You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud a spouse. You have the right to remain silent. Beside him, another officer slapped handcuffs on Isabella. She was screaming, kicking her legs like a toddler having a tantrum. Isabella Vance, the second officer said, ignoring her hysterics. You are under arrest as an accomplice to fraud and for money laundering through the shell entity known as Lux Events. I watched from the stage as the reality finally settled onto Derek's shoulders. The fight drained out of him. He looked small. He looked pathetic. When the officer spun him around to cuff his hands behind his back, Derek's eyes frantically searched the crowd until they locked onto mine. "Serafina," he wailed, tears streaming down his face and ruining his expensive silk collar. "Babe, please tell them to stop. I can explain. Don't let them take me." I descended the stairs of the stage slowly. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble walkway. I stopped directly in front of him. Up close, he smelled of sweat and terror. I looked at the engagement ring on my finger. It was a gaudy, oversized diamond that he had purchased using the stolen funds from Project Phoenix. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the ring off my finger. I held it up so the sunlight caught the facets of the stone. "You bought this with my money, Derek," I said calmly. I reached for a glass of champagne that had been abandoned on a nearby table. With a soft plink, I dropped the diamond ring into the bubbling golden liquid. "Keep it," I whispered. "You are going to need it to pay for your commissary." "Serafina, please," he sobbed, his knees buckling so the officer had to hold him up. We can fix this. I love you." I leaned in close, my voice barely a whisper, intimate and lethal. "You were right about one thing. Derek," I said, "I really am a total gold digger, but I wasn't digging for your money. I dug for the truth, and I kept digging until I exposed just how rotten you really are." I straightened up and turned to address the crowd, pitching my voice so the terrified guests in the back rows could hear me clearly. "My legal team has already filed a civil suit against Mr. Hawthorne," I announced. "Zenith Global will be seizing all personal assets to recover the stolen funds. That includes his apartment in the marina, his car, and his personal stock portfolio. He is leaving this marriage with exactly what he brought into it." Nothing. A commotion near the front row drew my attention. Derek's parents were standing up. His mother was clutching her purse to her chest, her face pale. Derek looked at them, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Mom, Dad," he choked out. His father did not even look at him. He took his wife's arm and turned his back on his only son. They walked down the aisle, heads bowed in absolute shame, refusing to acknowledge the criminal screaming their names. "Mom, don't leave me. Dad." Derek screamed, his voice breaking, but his parents were gone. In their place, the group of shadow creditors, the loan sharks, surrounded the police officers. They were not intimidated by the badges. They were furious. "He owes us $7 million, one of the men shouted, pointing a thick finger at Derek. "You can't just take him!" "We have first claim on his assets. Get in line," the detective snapped. I smiled. Derek was not just going to prison. He was going to prison with a massive debt to violent men who had long memories. Even if he survived his sentence, he would walk out of jail a hunted man, destitute and broken. I scanned the crowd again. I saw the faces of Derek's friends, the ones who had laughed at my clothes, the ones who had called me a parasite, the ones who had cheered when Derek mocked me on the yacht. They were trying to look invisible now. I pointed to the security team. "Get them out," I ordered, sweeping my hand toward the group of sycophants. Anyone who laughed at me, anyone who helped him hide his secrets, remove them from my property. Now! The guards moved in. The protests of Derek's entourage were silenced as they were forcibly escorted toward the gates. "Move it," the officer yelled, shoving Derek toward the exit. As they dragged Derek and Isabella down the long driveway, the gates opened. A swarm of paparazzi and news vans, tipped off by my office an hour ago, were waiting. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning. The cameras captured every tear, every scream, and every ounce of humiliation. "No, no cameras," Isabella shrieked, trying to hide her face with her cuffed hands. Serafina Derek howled one last time, his voice fading as he was shoved into the back of a squad car. I watched the red and blue lights flash against the darkening sky. His career was dead. His reputation was incinerated. The parasite had been removed. The police cars disappeared around the bend of the cliffside road, their sirens fading into a dull hum against the crashing waves. The garden, once filled with the nervous chatter of high society and the flash of cameras, was now perfectly still. The only people left were my security team and the handful of loyal Zenith Global staff I had trusted with the truth. I stood in the center of the empty aisle, looking at the white flowers and the silk ribbons fluttering in the wind. The sheer extravagance of the setup felt ridiculous now. It was a stage built for a lie, but I had turned it into an altar for the truth. For the first time in 3 years, I felt my shoulders drop. The weight of the deception, the exhaustion of playing the naive artist, and the constant vigilance against Derek's gaslighting were gone. I felt lighter than air. Marcus stepped out from the shadows of the gazebo. He held a leather folder in his hands, his expression solemn but satisfied. "The paperwork is ready." "Serafina," Marcus said softly. "The board has already ratified the decision via the emergency digital vote. We just need your final signature." He opened the folder. Inside lay the official termination order for Derek Hawthorne, stripping him of his title, his salary, and his unvested stock options. "Give me the pen," I said. I took the heavy fountain pen from his hand. I did not hesitate. I did not tremble. With a fluid, sharp motion, I signed Serafina Cross in bold blue ink at the bottom of the page. It was not just a signature. It was a declaration of independence. "It is done." Marcus nodded, closing the folder with a satisfying snap. "What should we do with the reception the caterers have prepared food for 300 people? I looked at the banquet tables laden with lobster, caviar, and vintage wines. It was obscene to let it go to waste, but I would not let it be consumed by the vultures of high society. "Open the gates," I ordered, turning to my assistant. "Call the main office. Send a blast email to every junior associate, every janitor, every receptionist, and every intern at Zenith Global. Tell them the wedding is off, but the party is on. Tell them dinner is on the chairman. They will love that." My assistant smiled. "I need a moment," I said. I walked back into the estate and went straight to the bridal suite. I stripped off the ruined wedding dress, the silk stained with wine and memories of betrayal, and left it in a heap on the floor. I never wanted to see it again. I opened my garment bag and pulled out a tailored white power suit. As I buttoned the jacket and adjusted the collar, I looked in the mirror. The girl who wanted to be loved for her simplicity was gone. The woman staring back was powerful, wealthy, and unapologetically in charge. I walked out onto the balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to check the news. The headlines were already screaming. Heiress exposes fraud at altar. Zenith Global purges corruption. Serafina Cross takes the helm. I checked the market app. In the last hour of aftermarket trading, Zenith Global stock had surged by 15%. The market loved transparency. They loved a leader who was willing to cut out the cancer to save the body. For so long, I thought I needed a partner to share my life with. I thought I needed Derek to validate that I was lovable despite my money. I realized now how wrong I was. I did not need a man to define my worth. I did not need a husband to manage my empire. I was the empire. I picked up a glass of red wine from the railing. The liquid caught the dying light of the sun. To freedom, I whispered to the wind. I drank the wine in one long, satisfying swallow. It tasted like victory. It tasted like the future. I set the empty glass down and turned my back on the sunset. I walked back inside, leaving the darkness and the past behind me. Serafina Cross had work to do, and the world was finally ready to meet her. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Serafina's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and if you really enjoyed it, please hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next drama.